People always take you as they see you, not necessarily as you are. I couldn't possibly be a symbol.
No doubt she was a legendary voice, the queen of cool, smooth, and soulful. But behind the glitz, glamour, and that iconic hit, Smooth Operator, lies a story that most fans never saw coming.
In a way, I'm a bit of a misfit, I suppose. I couldn't possibly be a symbol if I didn't like sequins and stuff.
But beyond the glamour, elegance, and that famous single, Smooth Operator, is a narrative that most fans never saw coming. In a sense,
You have to not be scared to go away. Obviously, I think a lot of people are frightened that if they go away, if they disappear for a while, everything will crumble.
Sade, the elusive and enchanting diva who once commanded the charts and hearts, appeared to fade from the limelight just as easily as she entered it. You have to not be terrified to go away. Obviously, I believe a lot of people are worried that if they walk away, if they go for a little, everything will disintegrate. What exactly happened to the lady who characterized an age of elegance and emotional depth? Buckle up, because her tale is considerably more tragic than you'd anticipate. Britain's not exactly the first location you think of when it comes to soul music. But in the 80s, something sort of surprising occurred. A wave of British performers began vibing hard with that traditional soul sound. You had Phil Collins playing the Supremes, Soft Cell, and Dexy's Midnight Runners, going through boxes for old-school R&B albums, and a lot of slick, white-fronted, artificial soul bands like Spandau Ballet, ABC, and subsequently Roxy Music springing up everywhere. But then came Sade, and suddenly everything became real. They added some tremendous soul and honesty to the situation. Their first album, Diamond Life, was an entire mood. It characterized the 80s for a lot of people. Smooth, seductive, and ageless, it essentially became the soundtrack to slow dances and late-night feelings. With classics like Your Love is King, When Am I Gonna Make a Living, and The Sweetest Taboo, they weren't just producing music, they were creating a feeling. But it remains one enormous question. Who was this band, really? The narrative of the band Sade truly begins with the Sade, the lady herself. Born Helen Fulasad Adu in Ibadan in Nigeria in 1959, her early life took a sudden turn when her parents parted. From the age of 4, she was nurtured in the gentler areas of southeast England, spending her adolescent years in the peaceful coastal town of Clacton, Essex, a long cry from the opulent life she'd later enjoy. I was born in Nigeria, in some place called Ibadan. Her mom was a nurse, not exactly playing records all day. So, tiny Sud got her musical dose from pirate radio, mainly Radio Caroline. That's when she fell in love with soulful superstars like Donny Hathaway, Bill Withers, Gil Scott-Heron, Ray Charles, and Nina Simone. Heavy hitters, real soul. By the late 70s, Clacton wasn't exactly bustling with potential. So, Sadie made the move to London. She studied fashion at St. Martin's College, really artistic, really awesome. And after graduation, she dabbled in menswear design and did some part-time modeling. But here's where it gets fascinating. She began hitting the London club scene and her style popped. Ponytail slicked back, tight black clothes, bright red lips, and those now famous gold hoop earrings. She was turning heads in an environment where more is more was the ethos. Even though she'd never sang a note professionally, her easy calm gave her a chance with a London funk band named Pride. And just like that, her music adventure started. By complete accident. One Sade stated, "What people don't know is that when I auditioned for them, they rejected me. I was really astonished. It wasn't an issue of never failing at anything, but all the things I'd truly wanted to achieve. Till then, I'd done." Funny thing is, Pride didn't exactly rush at the opportunity to make Sade their star. In fact, they couldn't locate anybody else, so they settled with allowing her in. As a background vocalist, wild, right? So, during 1981 and 82, this 7-piece funk band was slogging it out, traveling all over London and the South, attempting to be recognized. Meanwhile, Saggy was discreetly brewing up something spectacular behind the scenes. She began creating her own songs with sax player Stuart Matthewman, a northern soul enthusiast from Hull who fully grasped her feel. The two of them started splitting off from the main act, playing short support shows for Pride. And those stripped-down, heartfelt performances, totally different from the loud, showy funk of the main band. Think gloomy lighting, gentle voices, and silky sax. They also sang an extremely calm version of Julie London's Cry Me a River that turned attention. People began notice, and not simply because of the music, but because Sade had that it factor. It was evident something significant was going to happen. One of the tunes Sade and Matthew Mann performed during those early sets? Yeah, an early version of Smooth Operator. Total game changer. It began creating buzz, and people were suddenly considerably more interested in them than the major band. By early 1983, Pride came apart, shocker, and Sade made her move. She grabbed the true talent, Stuart Matthewman, pianist Andrew Hale, and bassist Paul Spencer Denman, and built a new band. They kept it basic and iconic, said, named after the lady who was swiftly becoming the face, the voice, and the mood of the entire organization. Musically, they were all on the same page. Classic soul was their base. They were utterly enamored with those warm, passionate vintage albums. But here's what made them distinct. They enjoyed the faults, the rawness. The soul artists Sade liked weren't pitch-perfect machines. They sung like they'd lived every line, and on top of that, they had a little punk edge in their attitude. That DIY screw-the-system enthusiasm energized them just as much as the lovely music. Andrew Hale, the guitarist, remarked, "Musically, we all had similar ground, since we all enjoyed old soul recordings. Since Andrew Hale, who, like Denman and Matthewman, has been with Sadie since 1983. We were all enamored with soul, but we also adored defects. All the vocalists that Sade admired, they weren't necessarily technically flawless, but you sensed their life in their songs. Equally, we were motivated by punk because it was a kind of feff you DIY mentality. With buzz rising, labels began sniffing around, but they needed a demo to effectively market themselves around. Only problem? They were broke, no money for studio time. So they came to Robin Miller, a producer and proprietor of Power Plant Studios, and simply said, "Hey, can we work something out during your off hours?" Luckily, he was onto the concept and said yes, so they pieced together a modest 2-track demo comprising Smooth Operator and Your Love is King, two pieces that would later become total classics. Your Love is King, Crown You in My Heart. But get this, the labels loathed it. The band's manager sent the demos around to record labels, and every company turned them down. They complained the tunes were too lengthy and too jazzy, recalls Millar. They asked, "Don't you realize what's happening? Everything is electronic drums now. Tears for Worries, Depeche Mode." This was a bit of a blow, since when we played them to anyone who came by the studio, we'd receive a tremendous response. So because the labels weren't biting, the team decided to play the game their own way, by talking themselves up. And they had some significant fashion industry contacts to assist them. Thanks to Sad's cool girl reputation in the London scene, she had individuals like Robert Elms and true fashion legend Jean-Paul Gaultier in her camp. Not terrible, right? They leaned all the way in on the image, the mystery, the mood. Then bam! Sade hits the cover of The Face, which was literally the trend Bible of the period.
She turned me down and then came crawling back to me when they couldn't find anybody better.
Suddenly, they weren't simply a band, they were the moment. And just to sweeten the deal, they planned a crowded showcase event at Heaven nightclub, one of London's trendiest venues. Everyone who was anybody in the music press was there. It was bold, it was fashionable, and it was the type of clever self-promotion that labels generally do when an artist makes it big. Sade and her crew, they accomplished it all on their own. There were 1,000 people queued up around the entrance of this modest club. Suddenly, all those same record labels that turned them down were crawling all over Sade. They were anxious to sign her, claimed Miller.
We're about to be signed. We don't know who to, but there's like three or four of the major companies are after us.
So by October 1983, everything finally began clicking. Sade herself was signed to Epic Records, and by the end of '84, the rest of the band, Matthewman, Hale, and Denman, were officially on board too. Labels were now catching on to what the streets already understood. Sade was something unique. So, in October '83, with the Epic agreement in the bag, the band moved back to Powerplant Studios, exactly where it all begun, with Robin Miller at the lead. This time, it was for real. They were ready to complete their first record. And honestly, here is when the Sade sound truly came to life. That smooth, stripped-down, effortlessly cool feel wasn't merely a stylistic decision. It fit who they were. They weren't attempting to be showy virtuosos. Their simplicity wasn't about cutting corners. It was about purposeful simplicity. Letting every note breathe, letting every lyric soak in. Their inexperience as musicians really worked in their advantage. No overproduction, no extraneous layers, just genuine, heartfelt, soulful music that felt authentic. That studio session wasn't simply about completing a record. It was about discovering their voice, and it was going to take over the planet. Stuart Matthewman remarked, "The tunes ended up being pretty basic and pared down. The reason for it was that none of us were excellent musicians, but we all sounded fantastic. Sade had a wonderful voice, but she wasn't a trained singer. The same thing with me. I could achieve a beautiful tone with my sax, but I never studied jazz." Andrew would play basic chords and Paul was a rudimentary bass player. If any of us had been 10 or 20% better as musicians, it would have been awful. It would have been too much. What made our sound distinctive is that we were young and innocent, and we didn't really know what we were doing. At the center of it all, however, was always that voice. Sade's voice. It wasn't loud or ostentatious like other of her spiritual heroes, but that was the charm. Unassuming, smooth, and absolutely mesmerizing. She didn't have to belt to make you feel anything. There was this calm intensity to the way she sang, like every word had weight, every note had importance. It was sensual without trying, passionate without the drama. She possessed that uncommon skill, the capacity to communicate so much with so little, simply pure, effortless energy. And when you heard her sing, you felt it in your chest and your bones. That's what set her distinct. You guided us to the smooth operator. In your bones. That's what set her distinct. She would also create the bulk of the tracks herself, humming the melody into a tape recorder so that the band could convert it into music. Stewart said, "Saeed has got a great ear. She writes all the words and gets all the tunes worked out in her head. When she gets into something, she just plows on and on. Me, Andrew, Paul, or whoever just put the chords down. But somehow, Saeed never really gets any credit for being a songwriter at all." Alongside the band's spare musicianship were the arrangements of Miller. The iconic Latin-inspired bongos pedaled throughout were his idea. Though from a production point of view, he was coming from a similar angle as the band's influences. Atlantic soul, but with an amateur British spin. We don't sit around and say, "Right, we're going to create this sound." It happens too naturally for us to even intellectualize about. When we create a song, it's just, there it goes. Our music is clearly pop because it's easy to understand. All the songs I've ever loved, even jazz stuff, are things that tell a story. It should take you somewhere and move you in some way. And that's what I want our songs to do. The highlight is the album's opening track, Smooth Operator. Co-written by former Pride member Raymond St. John, the song's lyrics give the album its title and weaves the tale of a globe-trotting, smooth-talking bad boy who a dude knows is trash but finds irresistible. It opens with a spoken word section to set the scene, akin to hero Gil Scott-Heron, but Sade evoking sultry indifference rather than politicized rage. Hale's subtle keyboards and Denman's complementary bass give the atmosphere of moonlit walks on a Mediterranean beach, but even with Matthewman's sax solos punctuating the track, no one seems to be trying super hard, giving it its laid-back vibe. Sade's songs were often autobiographical or based on something that had happened to those close to her, though most swirled around themes of the heart. Your Love is King, for example, is love at its most overtly sexual. Second single, When Am I Gonna Make a Living, was their version of the Valentine Brothers' Money's Too Tight to Mention, written in response to her frustrations at her poor financial situation and having to live in a squat in an abandoned fire station. She said, "I can remember in the Pride days walking from Turnpike Lane to it was pouring and I was soaking wet, pissed off and miserable. I got my pen out and started to write, when am I gonna make a living on a soggy envelope? I got halfway through and the pen stopped working." That song's our anthem now. When Diamond Life dropped, it was clear the album was something special, but the UK music press, they totally misunderstood it. Thanks in part to the cover art, which showed the ultra-glamorous Sade in full effect, they pegged the song Smooth Operator as this kind of aspirational anthem for the yuppie crowd. Think young professionals living for that money, high-rise living, and endless parties. They painted the band's music as the soundtrack for coke-fueled nights and stock market hustlers. Basically the whole buy low, sell high mentality of the ADS. The issue? That wasn't at all what Sode was about. But that narrative? It stuck. For years, it haunted them in the UK. Every time they released new music, the press would drag out that same yuppie connection. Even though the band's sound was always so much deeper, more soulful, and more nuanced than that, Epic saw Sade as an album band, to which the band agreed. But then their first single, Your Love Is King, went number 6 in the UK chart. Appearing on top of the pops during the reign of synth pop, they clearly didn't fit in. Everything got a bit electronic, and we weren't into that at all. On our first Top of the Pops, we looked like we'd landed from Mars, all dressed in black, and we didn't grin. We were of our period, but not in sync with what was happening on around us, Paul Denman stated in 2020. Simply read in Prefab Sprout, post-punk groups for ADS yuppies termed sophisti-pop, or notably for Sade corporate jazz. I'm frightened of anyone for 1 minute thinking that we're trying to be a jazz band. Because if we were, we could do it a lot better than we're doing now, Asad said in an interview. In the Thatcher Squeeze 1980s, the UK press wanted their music working class and hard scrabble. They championed the underdog. Their interpretation of Sade didn't align with this. They didn't have enough grit. Despite being dirt poor, they gave off an air of refinement, of moneyed elegance. So being a Nigerian, even though you've lived in England all your life, how do you find the weather here? It found me very quickly. As soon as I got off the plane, it found me. Never underestimate the dividing power of the British class system, which maintains snobbery on all levels. With its wine bar smoothness and Latin percussion, their third single and second top 20 hit, Smooth Operator, was a tongue-in-cheek condemnation of an international lover boy. But that was lost in translation and seen more as a promotion of exotic glamour. Additionally, Adu herself is tired of interviews, journalists rarely wanting to ask her anything about music, instead focusing on her looks, fashion, and sex life. Oftentimes she would find her words misrepresented. She said, "I came to think that those tape machines the journalists used would just scramble what you say, like a liquidizer. It's terrible, this mentality that if something seems simple, there must be something funny going on." After Diamond Life hit, Sade basically dipped from the spotlight, especially when it came to the UK press. She rarely gave interviews, and honestly, who could blame her? The British tabloids, with nothing better to do, started spinning wild stories just to fill the silence. We're talking totally made-up headlines like Sade secretly having a baby, or randomly buying Fulham Football Club. Like, what? Meanwhile, across the pond, things were looking very different. In the UK, radio was more of a mix-everything approach, BBC style, blending all genres together. But in the US, it was way more segmented, with specific stations for specific sounds. Sade and the team knew that if they jumped straight into the pop charts with Smooth Operator, it might blow up, but it could also burn out fast and kill any chance of long-term respect, especially with black audiences. So they played it smart. Instead of leading with the big hit, they dropped Hang On to Your Love as their first US single in November '84. It had a funkier groove and was a better fit for black radio, where they knew they could build a solid foundation. And spoiler alert, it worked. If 1984 was the year Sade broke through, then 1985 was the year they owned it. At the Brit Awards, Diamond Life snagged Best British Album, and Smooth Operator even got a nom for Best Single, though it lost out to the synthy chaos of Frankie Goes to Hollywood's Relaxed. Can't win 'em all. But while the UK press kept up with their usual rumors and elitist vibes, America was falling hard for Sade. Across the Atlantic, they weren't just appreciated, they were embraced. Smooth Operator hit the top 5 on the Billboard Hot 100 and dominated the adult contemporary chart, helped massively by airplay on the newly launched Adult Cool VH1. Ironically, even though the UK birthed Diamond Life, it was the US that really gave it staying power. It hit triple platinum in the UK by the end of '85, but weirdly, it wouldn't hit that same milestone in the US until 1995. Still, they won Best New Artist at the Grammys in '85 and were the only female-fronted act to perform at the UK leg of Live 85 and were the only female-fronted act to perform at the UK leg of Live Aid. Iconic much? Forget the whole out of sight, out of mind thing. Sade proved the opposite. Less is more when your music hits that deep. And the impact? Unreal. Everyone from metal dudes like Mike Patton and Deftones to R&B royalty like Frank Ocean, D'Angelo, Alicia Keys, The Weeknd, and Beyoncé. They all name-check Sade, that smooth, smoky, emotional core. It's everywhere now.